Welcome to Books on Air. I'm Suzanne Harris. Books on Air is a series where we do a deep dive into the writer's passion. We talk about why they wrote the book, what their writing process is like, and what they hope their reader will take away from their book. You get a real glimpse behind the creative curtain, if you will. Joining me today is William J. Green. Bill is here to talk about his fascinating book, The Sandford Tales and Other Stories, both tall and short. Bill, welcome. I can't tell you what a pleasure it is to have you as my guest on Books on Air.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I've really been looking forward to this, and I hope it goes as well as I hope it does. Okay?
Oh, this is just going to be so much fun. You know, books always have two stories that they tell. The first story is the story that you, as the author, decided you were going to put down on proverbial paper and share with the reader. But there's always a secret story, Bill. There's a secret story behind the Sandford Tales. Why did you decide that now was the time to share all of these stories about how the Sharpie was developed with the world?
Well, I wrote them in my mind as they happened back in the 1970s, 60s, and 70s. And well, if I could tell a little story now, maybe this would be a good time to do it. I every once in a while I would mention to somebody in conversation that I was a chemist who put together the Sharpie Marker. And then I would look at their reaction. And, you know, with the first few years after I left Sanford, I would get a polite, interesting smile or something. But as time went on, there was a lot of interest there. It kept growing and growing. And finally, I was on a train between Albuquerque and Chicago. We sat down for a meal with a group of people that I'd never met before, and that's always a fun thing to do. And somewhere in the middle of the conversation, I dropped my little comment about my work developing the Sharpie Marker, and there was a lot of interest. But when the lunch was over, I went back to my seat, and I'm sitting there, and suddenly this young man walks up and looked at me and said, "Excuse me, but I understand you're the chemist that put together the Sharpie Marker, and I just wanted to meet you." And that woke me up. I said, "Do you know what? This is a story that needs to be told. And not told just because it's a success story in business, but there's a lot of human interest stories that really puts it together."
As you and I talked before we started the interview, you just have 1,000 stories about this. I mean, this is
1,001.
You really do. And this is a true American classic told by an insider. And when you and I started talking, I said to you, "Bill, I'm sitting here with a Sharpie marker in my hands, and I love Sharpies, and I use them all the time because they work so well for me, and because whenever I write with a Sharpie, it's like I'm writing on my brain. I can see it." And you laughed, but it's true. And I just think that sharing this story is just, what you've done is taken a piece of American industrial history and you've put it into personal terms because you talk about the people. I think that that's something that isn't talked about all that much. We know that all these things were invented, but we don't always know the people. And you have taken the time to tell individual stories about the people. Let's give an overview to the listeners about the book because it's so interesting.
Well, it's a book about people. That's right. In fact, when I'm looking about how do I write this and what do I do with it, business books are in a category all of their own, but this is not a business book. It's a story about a business. But I don't think there's a dollar sign in the whole book, and In fact, the only numbers in the book are at the bottom of the page. It's a people book, and that's what I took away from my experience was the incredible experience I had meeting different people from different cultures and totally different in so many ways, but we were all together, and that's what made Sharpie a success story, is because you had a wide variety of ethnic and cultural mix all coming together and working together. And I can't underline that enough, because my experiences after I left Sanford and went to other places, Sanford was unique. It was unique.
And we're talking about the Sandford Ink Company that's in Bellwood, Illinois. Now, you went to work there as a very young chemist out of college. How old were you?
Well, first let me back up and say that where I came from, kids got married out of high school.
Okay.
So, well, I didn't, but my wife and I we were just a couple of years out of college, and we got married, and I finished my college while we were married, and it took off her. I actually had one job in Cleveland, and home was Iowa, but in Cleveland was just so far away. I wanted our kids to know their parents, our parents, their grandparents, and their cousins, and so on. And I just didn't see that happening. And if we were that far away, so I went looking for a job in the Chicago area, where at least we could be a little closer to the family. And there, I love to tell stories. Okay, I'm going to give you another one here. When I took this job with this small private company, the Sandford Ink Company, also I took that job, and then I got a phone call from General Electric, and they offered me a job as a chemist, being part of the team that was going to develop the color television tube for General Electric. And I think I got to be absolutely crazy to turn that down, but I'm going to put my family first, and I'm going to go to Chicago and go to work for this very small private company. And I'm looking back at it now, I'm talking to you about the work that I did there is all over the world. And the General Electric color television tube is in the trash of history.
You made the right choice.
I have all these stories I can tell. Amazing.
Before we came on,
I answered your question. Go ahead.
Well, you just have, you've talked about, you set this up for me I knew I should have started recording this while you and I were just talking. You set this up for me, and you started talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and you started talking about the Cuban refugees that were coming into Florida, and you were telling me about that President Kennedy had to come up with something to do with these refugees. Tell that story, tell that part of the story, so that our listeners can kind of get a sense of what history was going on at the same time. You guys are working in this small independent company, and you're working on this product. And when you open the story in the book, you describe what people are doing. And you also, in the book, describe the history of how the product develops over time. So set this up for me, Bill, like you did when you and I were just chatting.
Well, I'm not quite sure where to begin this, but when I joined the Sandford Ink Company, I was essentially from a very rural part of America, 100% white. In fact, we didn't even differentiate between like Italian and German and whatever. We were just white. That's all there was to it. went off to college and studied in the chemistry department. There wasn't much of an ethnic mix there. When I walked into Sandford Ink Company, I walked into something that was really amazing. There were blacks from the inner city, and there were blacks from college educated, and there were also this group of Cubans. And apparently, when Castro took over Cuba and these people escaped off the island literally at the risk of their lives, the word flotilla was come up with. They made floating devices, anything that would float and get them off that island, and they gathered together in these flotillas and tried to get them to Miami. And President Kennedy had to do something with all these people in one place, and so he asked companies all over the country that were willing to just let him know, and he'd send them some people to join their workforce. So when I walked into Sandford Ink Company, I walked into an ethnic mix that included these Cuban refugees, and it was really a cultural adventure for me to hear their stories and get to know them. And some of those stories are in my book, and a couple really good ones. But the book does that. There was a cultural and ethnic mix that all came together under the supervision of some very wise and honest people, and it all came together while we were doing this. Dr. King was beginning his career as promoting civil rights and trying to promote ethnic. How can I put this? And we're all God's children. Let's get together. And it was already underway at the Sandford Ink Company. Looking back on now, I can see it, and understand it. Back then, I just experienced it. So, but now I can look at my experiences and begin to understand them. And that was really a wonderful, wonderful experience to see everybody come together that way, and at the end produce something that's now part of our history.
Do you think that things happened as a result of that cultural mix that would never have happened had it just remained an all-white company?
Oh, absolutely. The fact that the president of the company would go walking through the factory and talk to an hourly employee was part of how he put together his products and his attempt at reaching the market. And one of the stories in my book, we got a brand new product we're getting ready to go on the market with, and the factory line is set up and running, and he walks out into the factory, and when he walked by the line where this new product was being made, he overheard a comment by one of the workers on the assembly line. And in the book, I've got this story. He stopped in his tracks, went back to the PA system and called an emergency meeting, and he shut down the assembly line just based on the comment of one of the people on the assembly line. That whole product got a brand new beginning, and that's only possible because he would listen to somebody on the assembly line.
Wow!
And it was an everyday thing, not just an occurrence, but it was an everyday thing.
Now, was this Chuck Lofgren?
This was Chuck Lofgren, yeah.
You devote a whole chapter to him.
Well, the book, there's three people that are, technically speaking, they're responsible for the Sharpie Marker. This is the president of the company, and I introduce him and by describing him, and then I tell 3 stories that bring him to life. That's the way the book works. I introduce this person, and then I tell the stories that make him a human being that you can see with his holding his cigarette next to his chest, and he becomes a real person. At least that's my intent. Then there was Francis Gilbert, the vice president, who was also a chemist, and he and I worked together so well. What a quality person he was! It just I tell several. I introduce him, and then I tell some stories that bring him to life, and then I introduce myself and my very humble beginning. I don't want to dwell on that right now, but then I tell some stories about things that happened that you kind of get to know me. And then I go into the factory and introduce you to this ethnic mix that was out there doing the work, and had a lot of fun doing it and telling these stories and bringing this cultural mix. Bringing this cultural mix back to life like it was 50 years ago.
One of the things I thought was really cool was that you use some of those old schematic diagrams in the book so that people can see what that looked like. I really liked that.
Then I can't take too much credit for that. Here's another story for you. One of my very good friend, Fred Otto, my very, very good friend Otto is a patent attorney. And he started looking at, when we were working on this book, he started looking into the patents that Sanford had acquired along the road, and he thought this would be great material to put in the book. So he went into the patent search and came up with those diagrams for me. And I think it really added to the book.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I wonder, on a personal level, I mean, I can hear the enthusiasm, and I can hear how much you enjoyed working for Sanford. When you were writing the book, was it almost like you took a time machine and went back in time? Did you just sort of relive all of those stories and see all of those people as you went through and wrote the book?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I guess they're frozen in my mind at the the same age and time that they were. They'll never change in my mind. And it was a fun experience to go back and say hello to them again, laugh with them. We just lived together. We didn't work together. We lived together emotionally. I don't know. The Sanford was different to some of the other companies. It wasn't uncommon for a married couple to both work in the same factory. There were a number of married couples that worked together there. In the summertime, when the orders were the biggest and the workforce was all taking vacations, they liked to bring in the factory workers' kids that needed some money to go to college and needed some money to go to get on with their careers and so on. So I got to know not only the people I worked with, but I got to know their families. This was really a unique experience. I don't know how you would create it today. I don't know how you would promote it. It was just it's an experience. It was an experience that needs to be preserved and shared, and that's what I tried to do.
This is just a labor of love. I can hear it in your voice, and I know our listeners can too. Is that fair for me to say that?
Oh, very, very much so. You're doing your job well.
Thank you, sir. Did you learn anything about yourself? You know, sometimes writing is an interesting process, and sometimes interesting things happen to us when we're writing because it's a different process. You're in a different place in your head. You're in a creative place, and you're thinking slightly differently. Was there anything about this that you got some surprise for yourself, or did you learn something about yourself? Any kind of revelation come out of this, Bill?
Well, yes. There is something that finally I began to realize, and when other people see what they decide they want to do, what I did, write a book. Okay, you know what? I have no idea how to coach you in doing that, and I know now, looking back, it was who I am, and how did all this happen? I don't know, but I didn't understand that at the time when all these things were happening. I did some storytelling. I wrote. I took. Oh, here. I don't know whether I should tell you this or not, but I decided to write a story and see if I could get it published. And I had a very good acceptance into the black community that was there. So I wrote a story about a black family, and I submitted it for publication to the Crier, which is the publication of the NAACP, and they accepted it and published it. And the story had all the names of the people in the story were names from the factory, and I never told them that I was doing that. So when the Crier hit the market, and these people saw their names in this story, and it was a fictitious story about somebody who won the lottery and wanted to go out and buy a house, and a black couple that wanted to buy a house in a white neighborhood, and a bunch of crazy things. It was a fun story to write, but anyhow, I had to buy my way out of trouble there. It was fun. It was fun.
Bill,
as far as what I learned about myself, I guess that I'm a storyteller, and I'm doing it now. I didn't realize when it was all happening, but I realize it now.
You are a storyteller. And, I'll bet if you sit down and think about it, this is probably not the only book you have inside you. If you sit down and you really just think about it, because listen to what you've been saying to me about all the people, and you just said that about writing a story that was fiction. There may be another book in there, Bill. Sit down and think about that.
Oh yeah, it was. It was something that you're right, something that I am, and so I sat down and do it.
That's right. And it's very difficult. You're absolutely right. It's very difficult to try to tell someone else how this process works. I've written fiction and nonfiction myself, and it either you can't explain it. There's something about that creative process that either happens for a person or it doesn't. And I don't know how to tell somebody how to write either. And I used to be an English teacher and try, but it's not that easy. Excuse me.
It's like an artist, and you watch these people on television or something. They pick up a paintbrush, and they all of a sudden everything flows, and there's an amazing picture there. Well, I could take the same paint and the same paintbrush, and it doesn't work. It's got to be who you are. There's something there that you start with that's you, and then some people can do one thing. So I couldn't paint a picture if I had to, but I like to tell stories.
I'm right there with you. Now, I've got one more question. This is coming. I always like for authors to have their last word about their work, especially a work that's such a labor of love as this one is. I mean, this is just, it's a wonderful book. It's such an inside story of an American icon, really. And there's so much more to it than that. And I know that there are some stories we haven't had time to share. And when our listeners become readers and they pick up a copy of the book, the Sandford Tales and Other Stories, both tall and short, they'll sit down and they'll start to read, and they'll be right there with you, Bill, in the factory, and they'll see all of these people. And as they read the book, when they come to the last page and read that last page, and they close the back cover, whether it's electronically or physically, what do you want that reader to leave with? What do you want them to take away from your book when they finish reading it?
Oh boy, I see 3 books. You mentioned earlier that there are 2 books. Well, there's actually 3 books in my case. There's a story here that just comes together by itself if you're paying attention, and if you're not paying attention, you can enjoy the other 2. But I don't dwell on it. But the poverty that I was raised in is storybook, and I remember, and this is in the book. I remember when I was finishing my freshman year of high school. I told my dad, who had a private business of his own, that it wasn't making any money, and I was helping him with it. But anyhow, I told him, Dad, I says, I think I want to go to college and study chemistry. I'd had no idea that I'm ever going to college, but all of a sudden, my senior year of high school, I found out I had an ability with chemistry, and maybe I should follow up on this. And I'll never forget telling my dad that I think I'll go to college, and him standing in his bib overalls and looking at me and so proud. And he said, he made a promise to me. He said, Bill, I'll take care of your mother so you never have to worry about her, so you can go to college. Where's the money coming from, Dad? That's another thing. But I'll never forget that moment. But what Dad did do, he went out and set me up in business. And this is going to be hard for any of your listening to this to understand. But basically, I had a business of my own, and I was dealing with a man there in my hometown that was a legend. When I say a legend, is because he had an experience that shocked the nation. He had a beautiful family of about 8 children, and that were all wiped out in one accident.
Oh.
And it literally shook the nation. And when he put me in business, the man's name was Richard, and that's the name of the chapter of my book. Richard put me in business, and he was putting me through college while his own children were all buried in a cemetery outside town. And there's something about this that somehow my poverty and his horrible experience come together to produce a product that's now used and loved by people around the world. And there's some sort of redemption message in there that I'm not going to try to explain to anybody, but it gives you something to think about.
The whole book, I think, gives people something to think about, and so do you. You have just been delightful. You've been wonderful, entertaining. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet you and talk to you. And I want to make sure that I tell our listeners, oh, no, it's just been great. Now, you can find Bill's book. The name of it again is The Sandford Tales and Other Stories, Both Tall and Short, by William, abbreviated W.M. period, J, capital J period, Green, Green, on Amazon. So go to Amazon, just put that title in or put Bill's name in, and there will be the book. Thank you so much, Bill, for coming on Books on Air and talking to me about the Sharpie and its invention and about the Sandford Ink Company and what a wonderful experience you had there. It's just been my pleasure to talk to you.
Well, thank you for giving me the chance to share all of this, because that's something I really feel like I want to do. I get to live it, but I need to share it.
Did you have a little fun?
Oh, yes, it was fun.
Great. You've been listening to Books on Air, brought to you on the webtalkradio.net platform. You can also hear this podcast on Apple, iHeartRadio, and Stitcher. And remember, keep reading, keep writing, and keep telling your stories. Thank you so much for listening.